cellar of the Monty-House. This is General Max Taylor after they liberated Noville. And he's talking, having a consultation with somebody. And right there, you can see a sort of a leftover of a tank. We're here, out in front of this building. And that tank would be right there. I knocked that son of a bitch out.
Is that right?
With a bazooka.
With a bazooka. You want to initial that one right here?
Huh?
Put your initials on there, Dan.
I'll tell you what we did. Just to finish that story. That was a school wall. And that tank came up off that ridge. Those buildings were not there. It came up this road and stopped there. And a guy and I crawled up to that wall and shot a bazooka at him. And we knocked him out. All right. Through the reconnaissance, the Houffalize to find out what was in Houffalize. I did not send a reconnaissance platoon to the east because it was confusing out there and I was afraid of Americans shooting Americans. I should have done it. That was my reason. I was wrong. I should have run out in spite of that. We got in here around midnight, set up a 360-degree defense of this town. We didn't know that we were in the low ground and those ridges were there because it was dark. After we got set and we were ready, I said, 50% go to sleep, I'm going to sleep, I'm tired. I went to sleep in the schoolhouse. I'd been asleep about an hour or so, sort of half asleep, when bangity bang, 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 off to the east, a hell of a fight. So out of bed, and we gathered right next to that church. And my instructions to my outposts were, if they were attacked, to stop the enemy and withdraw into already selected defensive positions, which the Sergeant Gant did. He came back into town, came up to me, I was standing at the church, and was madder than hell. He said, we fired at the Germans, and some half-tracks came up, and we had a hell of a fight with the grenades that close, and the tanks didn't fire. The tanks didn't fire until the Germans started to withdraw. He had been shot right through the mouth. And so I sent him on to the aid station. What turned out was the tanks at night were afraid to fire, afraid of putting their own. They'd put the armored infantry out in front and the tanks back, and never do that. Because when the engagement happened, the tankers were afraid to fire the main gun, and they waited. But they drove the Germans off. Now the Germans, oddly enough, broke a law. Instead of the point hitting and developing the situation like we're taught and go on, the point reported back to Lockett that the town was too heavily held and they couldn't take it. So Lockett made the decision of going all the way around from Borsey, all the way north and up to that ridge line. It took him over 2 hours. And we could hear the German tanks off in the distance. They make a hell of a noise. And I tell you, we were scared. But everybody's alert. Just about daylight, and we couldn't see more than 50 to 100 meters. The Germans hit my roadblock up there, and they had thought it was Americans. Americans had been coming through all night. In fact, one platoon of the 9th Armored Division came through intact and did a brilliant job. They stayed with us. We learned that, and this stick in your computer, if individual strikers come in and you try to stop them and get them to join you, you can't. They're worthless. They're shot. But if a unit comes in under command of its non-coms and its officers, they'll fight immediately. They'll do extremely well. And that's what that platoon of the 9th Armored Division did. The remnants of that outpost withdrew into their positions. At that point in time, I ordered the outpost out there to come back. So we're now buttoned up. The platoon that went to Houffalize straggled in. And we got some information from them. Being reconnaissance men, They ran the Germans that came around. They told us there were Germans in Houffalize, but they were going to the northeast. That turned out later to be the 116th Panzer Division, which was a part of the Corps to the north of us. So here we are, knowing the Germans are there, but nothing going on, fog, a lot of noise. Then all of a sudden, down that road, coming in this direction, came 2 or 3 Panther tanks and lots of Panzer Grenadiers. We opened about just at first light, 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock. And we really had a hell of a firefight. And we scattered those Panzer Grenadiers all over hell. You could see them disappear in the fog. And we knocked out the 2 tanks about 400 meters from the town. And the road was narrow. The Germans didn't get those tanks out. They became a roadblock on that road. When that happened, my dear engineer friend, I was over in the cemetery, which is right behind those buildings over here, and I found that there was a gap in the line. Nobody was defending that cemetery. So I got the engineer platoon and put him in the cemetery with me. Now, Bill Platt, the engineer battalion commander, came up to see me about that time. And I said, Bill, I apologize, and I took him out and showed him where I put his engineers, and he approved it. So if you got any criticism, wherever you are, I got the approval of the engineer battalion. And they fought a hell of a fight there. What I did do, though, after the 9th Armored Division platoon had a little rest, and about noon, I pulled the engineers out and put them in the rear of the town and replaced them with a platoon of the 9th Division. Now things quieted down for a little while. Along about 10 in the morning, the fog suddenly lifted. You know how ground fog comes and goes. And much to our chagrin, surprise, and horror, all along that ridge line were German tanks, completely. And about 10 in the morning, they launched an all-out attack. And that attack lasted for an hour and a half. And they moved all the way in. Some tanks got in and so forth, but we stopped them. It was at that point in time that I radioed Colonel Roberts and said, hey, I'm in the low ground, they're on the high ground, there are a hell of a lot of them out there. There's better ground to my rear at Foy. Request permission to withdraw to Foy. Colonel Roberts went to see McAuliffe, and on the way he ran into Jerry Higgins, who was the assistant division commander. Told him what was going on at Noville. At that point in time, Laprade, the 6th Fleet Battalion, was passing by. Higgins said, I will send Laprade out to help Desobry. And he ordered Laprade to continue on out the road and come on into Noville. Roberts radioed me that information, and I said, okay, here's stupid #1 decision by Desobry. I said, if he will come up, we will counterattack, and we will take the ridge line. Roberts said, fine. I sent a jeep back for Laprade. He came up. I showed him the situation. I said, let's go. He said, I'll go with you. We selected the time of 1400 hours. We coordinated with the artillery. They would give us 5-minute preparation plus smoke. So that was a scheme. We sent jeeps back. We got his company commanders, and I took the company commanders on the reconnaissance. There's a hell of a lot of artillery fire, machine gun fire coming in. I'm losing men rapidly. We ran out. We took blankets and sheets from the house, and anyone who was killed, we covered him. We couldn't evacuate him. We ran out of blankets. Our scheme was to put tanks out this road, tanks out that road, tanks out the Bourcy Road with armored infantry. And the paratroopers went out cross-country between them. At 1400 hours, or 5 minutes before, the artillery came down, the smoke came down at 1400, and we jumped off. Laukert, the 2nd Panzer Division commander, had selected 1,400 hours to launch his next attack. So we attacked out of this town, and they attacked over the ridge. Try that on your computer sometime. And all hell broke loose. We fought them all afternoon. There were tanks all over the place. I was on that side of the thing, and then on that side, and so on. One little incident you'll get a kick out of. I was back on the ridge back here, and this building wasn't here. And 2 of my tanks were dueling about 3 or 4 tanks out on the ridge. And they couldn't hit the Germans, and the Germans couldn't hit them. I'm standing there watching it, like a tennis match, with a bunch of my guys. There was a recon car, 37 millimeter gun, armored car alongside the building, and a sergeant. And he said, "Major, I can hit that son of a bitch. Your guys stink." And he jumped in the little armored car with his 37 millimeter gun, fired 1 round and knocked out a Panther on the ridge line. And what he obviously did, he hit the jerry cans, the gasoline cans, on the back deck. The gas went down in the engine, and it caught on fire. Then he stood up and he went like that. We had a lot of incidents like that. The knocked out tank here. When I took the paratroopers on the reconnaissance, we went through the building down there, and there were building on the other side of the road. The Germans had a habit of firing machine guns down the roads, and they'd fire tracers high and another machine gun low without tracers. So we had to be awful careful. A lot of artillery and mortar coming in, and we were going to go across the road, and I said, "Okay, through that, across the road, through that open door of the door of that building, and upstairs we'll look out and see out there." So the 1st paratroop guy runs, the 2nd paratroop guy runs, 3rd guy runs, and I run next. And we all run and dive into the building. Well, they had hit the floor, 1, 2, 3, pile. I hit the 4th, bounced out in the middle of the street. And those guys started laughing. They couldn't stop laughing. Okay. The paratroopers came on up the road for this attack. You won't believe it. They had come from Paris. Some of them didn't have rifles and stuff. We parked trucks on the side of the road at Foy, and they'd come by, and the guy'd say, "I need a carbine, I need an M1," and we'd throw it to them, ammunition and stuff. Some of the officers came in, and they still had their pinks and greens on, and their low shoes. And those guys came up that way and went into the counterattack. I've never seen anything like it. The coordination, the skill. They started out across that field and that field, which I could watch, and they were advancing on the dead run, squad and platoon, under complete control of their officers and non-coms, going 50 yards down, 50 yards. They made it up to the forward slopes, almost to the crest line, and couldn't go any further. And about 4 o'clock, Laprade said, "I can't go anymore." And I said, "I agree." My guys had been stopped, so we withdrew back into the town.
They still held the ridges.
They still held the ridges all the way around. Shortly after it was getting dark, I got in a firefight on the other side of the town with tanks that were trying to get around me. And I was over there commanding that when one of my guys came up and said, "You better get back to the CP. The paratroopers are pulling out going back to Bastogne." I said, "They can't do it." And I came on back. Laprade had gotten orders from Sink to pull back to Foy, and I pleaded with him. I said, "I can't go back. I'm under orders to stay here. I've lost a hell of a lot of my men. Won't you please stay with me?" He said, "I'll try." And he called Sink, and Sink said, "Yeah, I'll stay with him." I forgot to say that Bud Harper, General Harper, came up to see me during this battle, as did Bob Sink, the regimental commander. They knew the situation here firsthand.
Harper was 101st.
101st. Not a soul from CCB of the 10th Armored ever came. Not a soul ever visited Cherry, and not a soul ever visited O'Hara. I'll show you the difference. And those soldiers were great, Harper and Sink. I'd known Bob Sink. I'd been the basketball coach at Benning, and I beat his regimental team, and he remembered it. He reminded me of it. Okay, that night, the Germans patrol, little fights here, little fights there, all night long. The next morning, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division cut the road at Foy. Drove a battalion, this I believe the 26th was, actually drove elements of a battalion of paratroopers out of Foy back up to the ridgeline. Lockhart continued his attacks. 3 Panthers got into the town. One of the Panthers, 2 of them were destroyed. One of the Panthers was hit by one of my tanks fired at 50 meters. They went off his turret. The tank fired again, went off his turret. He backed up, ran over a jeep, lurched, and with the 2 rounds bang bang in the lurching, the Germans thought something had happened. Hatches were opened, they jumped out, they went off in the fog, and left us with a Panther with engines running, radios running. Now let me tell you something about village fighting. We stopped the Panzer Grenadiers. They never got into this town. We did it with machine gun fire, mortar fire, and things like that, not tank guns. The German tanks got right on the edge of the town or in the town. But without their Panzer Grenadiers, we were free to move from building to building around in complete freedom of movement except for artillery fire, machine gun fire. If their Panzer Grenadiers had gotten in with them, we couldn't have done that. I played my tank destroyer platoon like an accordion. I had the platoon leader with me at all times. He was my reserve. When they were getting too close in here, come in here, I deployed the TDs here. When they were getting too close over there, they were over there. They were just shifting. They were my reserve. The tanks were deployed completely and stayed in their sector. The TDs went where I needed them. I could only do that because the German Panzer Grenadiers couldn't get with it. We didn't do it on purpose, but in retrospect, we separated the tanks from their infantry. And if you do that, you can defeat even large armored forces. I mention that because you're going to have to fight in villages. And you need infantry. It's an absolute essential. I talked to von Manteuffel about it. I said, what happened to the Panzer Grenadiers? He talked to some of the officers. They said that in the 10 o'clock in the morning fight, we had given them so many casualties that they had to withdraw, pull back, and in the 1400 fight, although they were ordered to go, and they didn't move. They just froze. They wouldn't come out. They were beaten. That's how we won the Battle of Noville. We separated tanks from the infantry. I asked von Manteuffel why they didn't just bypass them and going into Bastogne. He said because their orders were to go to the Meuse, and Bayerline was to take Bastogne. I asked him who made the decision, and Simone, you remember that. He said, I did. And I shook his hand and said, thank you very much. You lost the war. And you have a picture of that, don't you? Yeah. But von der Heydt said, stood there on the ridge with Manteuffel and me, and he said, God damn, if the Americans had put on a lousy attack like this, like the 2nd Panthers did, I'd still be holding the bridge at Carentan in Normandy. He was disgusted with the 2nd Panthers. I thought they were pretty damn good. And one last thing, and then I'll open myself to questions. I think really, and I'm sincere about this, it was here that the M1 Abrams tank and its characteristics were born. This battle had more influence on me than anything in my career. The reason I insisted on agility and speed and cross-country mobility, 1,500 horsepower engine, 25 to 1 horsepower to weight ratio, was because I couldn't get off these roads. The ground was like it is now. The Germans got off the road, but they were only moving at 3 to 5 miles an hour. If they had been able to come over that ridge line at the speed the M1 can go, I wouldn't be here today. But because they had to move so slowly, I could shift my tanks and my tank destroyers to meet them. Plus the fact that they as individual gunners had plenty of time to take the tanks under fire and shift from one tank to the other. I saw there that it was absolutely essential in tank warfare, if they're going to be an offensive weapon, to have speed where you can close with the enemy immediately, and the time of exposure is reduced to zilch. And that's what. And I made that speech when we got the job of designing the M1, and it's in that tank today. So, Jack, that was done right here.
Fantastic.
Any questions?
We got that on film.
This church was destroyed. I have a painting of the inside of this church given me by the mayor of America. And this is the way they were. That's all new. But you can see the shrapnel. See the holes?
C'est ce qui restait le mieux. Hein?
These were the best, of course.
Tout le reste était détruit.
But this whole church was destroyed completely. Lieutenant Green got up in the tower, and I didn't know it, and I sent for him. I had a rule, never let the artillery liaison officer out of your sight, let you sneaked away from him. And I said, where is he? And they said, he's in the tower, directing fire. And I said, get his butt out of there right away. He came over here, and they sent him in right up. Got him out, and he was in that tower, the Germans. That's a rule. You never let your battalion liaison officer feel artillery out of your sight. Take a rope and tie it on.
That's three you can let out of your sight.
The hell with the S3. You're wrong. Why should have mentioned you're wrong? That's the
Okay. I don't have manuals caught like that.
Right.